Hi everyone, my warmest greetings to all of you. It is my great honor to welcome you to this webinar, Connecting the Dots, CEDAW, Beijing Plus 30 and the SDGs. Let me begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to Lee Elwood Brown, our dedicated Director of Advocacy, organizer and moderator for this session, and to our very knowledgeable speakers, Berthe De Vos, Dawn Marie Lemonds, Linda Witong Abrahm, and Pat Black, who will share their invaluable insights with us today. As President of Soroptimist International, I'm deeply honored to join the webinar to reflect on the progress made since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Over the past 30 years, we have witnessed remarkable strides towards gender equality. Advocacy efforts have grown stronger, laws have been enacted to protect women's rights, and millions of girls now have access to education that was once denied to them. Women's leadership in politics and women and business has increased, and global frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals, what we call the SDGs, have reinforced the urgency of achieving gender equality. Yet, we must also acknowledge that much remains to be done. Challenges such as the gender-based violence, economic inequality, and the disproportionate impact of climate change on women persist, reminding us that our work is far from complete. This brings us to the heart of today's discussion, connecting the commitments of Beijing Plus 30 with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. For Soroptimist International, the SDGs are of particular importance are those that affect women and girls, especially Goal 5, Gender Equality, and Goal 6, Quality Education. These goals, alongside Goal 13 on climate action, which aligns with my biennial theme, Save Mother Earth, Save the Future, and Goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, reflect our mission to educate, empower, and enable women and girls to thrive on sustainable and safe Mother Earth. These frameworks are not merely guidelines, they are powerful tools for advocacy and action. Well, as the saying goes, great oaks grow from little acorns. By aligning these frameworks, we plant the seeds for lasting change, ensuring that no woman or girl is left behind. At Soroptimist International, we continue to champion these priorities through our Where We Stand position papers, particularly those focused on women, peace and security, and about violence against women and girls. These papers underscore the interconnected nature of peace building, sustainable development, and gender equality. This webinar provides an opportunity to reflect on the progress made, challenges encountered, and the gaps found. As the saying goes, actions speak louder than words, or as I would like to put it for today's event, don't just dot the dots. Let's work to connect the dots for a very successful webinar and fantastic outcome. Thank you all for being here. It's so much appreciated, and I eagerly look forward to the insights on progress, connections, and solutions that will emerge from today's discussion. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. So those that have just joined, our webinar tonight or today is Connecting the Dots. And our team will be myself as moderator. We have Berthe De Vos-Neven will speak on CEDAW, Dawn Marie Lemonds on the 4th World Conference on Women, Linda Witong Abrahm in Beijing Plus 30, and Pat Black on the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So they will be in this order. Just for the housekeeping for this session, if everyone can please stay muted during the presentations. Unmute if you wish to ask a question at the end of our presentation. I will call for Q&A. and it will be uploaded, or the session will be uploaded to YouTube as soon as possible. If you do not wish to be recorded, please keep your cameras turned off. And I will introduce each presentation prior to the session, and the bios I will post into the chat box to save us time. Thank you. I will now like to introduce Berthe De Vos-Neven. Berthe is going to speak on CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women. And I just have a couple of her attributes, because these women have amazing awards and contribution to all types of advocacy. So you will see in the chat box the further details for Berthe. Berthe is a lead SI representative to the UN in Geneva, and she is also our newly elected International Director of Advocacy elect. So Berthe will take on the role at the beginning of next year. She'll take over from me. Welcome, Berthe.
Thank you, Lee. Next slide, please. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thank you for joining us. Human rights are universal, and gender equality is central to them and to the UN. Gender-based discrimination is prohibited by nearly all human rights treaties. And while progress has been made, millions of women and girls still face discrimination, violence, and denial of equality, dignity, and autonomy. Such discrimination remains deeply ingrained in societies and continues systematically. Recently, skepticism about women's rights and gender equality has grown, even as feminist movements amplify demands for equality. Civil society, including groups like Feminist International, must better understand international connections and UN entities to raise awareness locally and nationally about preventing discrimination. A key convention for women and girls is CEDAW, the International Bill for Women. The Convention of the Elimination... No. Go back, please. Thank you. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, better known as CEDAW, is a global treaty on women's rights. It was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly and entered in force in 1981. CEDAW is a key international human rights treaty that aims at the achievement of gender equality worldwide. It helps women around the world to bring the change in their daily life. The convention is based on three principles: sustainable equality, non-discrimination, and states' obligation. There are three sources that constitute the CEDAW framework: the convention, which is 30 articles, which defines what constitutes discrimination against women and sets up an agenda for national action to end such discrimination. Secondly, we have the general recommendations. And thirdly, it's based on case law. Next slide, please. The convention has been ratified by 189 states. And today, there are 2 states who are only signatories: Palau and the United States of America. And only 6 countries in the world didn't take any action regarding the convention: the Holy See, Iran, and Somalia, to mention some. The ratification of CEDAW means that member states are obliged to implement the convention in the national legislation and submit regular reports to CEDAW Commission on how progress is made in the area, such as violence against women, gender pay gap, stereotyping, and so on. Next slide, please. What does CEDAW mean now? The purpose of the present convention is to define discrimination against women. In Article 1, it describes it as any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has an effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, the enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of the marital status, and on basis of equality of men and women, of all her human rights and fundamental freedom in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, and other fields. CEDAW is a most important treaty for women because member states have voluntarily agreed to ensure respect, protect, and promote human rights for women in all circumstances in their territory. In the countries that have ratified the CEDAW treaty, CEDAW has been proved valuable on the fight against discrimination, which includes violence, poverty, and the lack of legal protection, along with the denial of inheritance, property rights, and the access to credit. Next slide, please. Why do we need CEDAW? Discrimination against women violates the basic premise of human rights, which is that all human beings are inherently entitled to equal rights and respect to their dignity. CEDAW is a cornerstone dedicated to achieve gender equality and addressing discrimination against women. It recognizes that discrimination violates the fundamental human rights of equality and dignity, also undermining the woman's social, political, and economic participation, hindering development, and perpetuating poverty, isolation, and inequality in access to essential services such as health, education, and empowerment. Known as the Women's Bill of Rights, CEDAW outlines concrete actions countries must take to ban discrimination and ensure women's rights. It is the only treaty affirming women's reproductive rights and addressing cultural and traditional influences on gender roles. CEDAW targets critical barriers to equality. It guarantees that women's rights to nationality, and it aims to combat trafficking and exploitation. By ensuring women's equal opportunities in political and public life, including the right to vote and to run for office, education, health, and employment, CEDAW provides the framework for realizing equality. Globally, CEDAW continues to empower women to advocate to change and improve their daily lives. Next slide, please. The CEDAW experts. The implementation of CEDAW is monitored by the CEDAW Committee, comprised by 23 individual experts who are elected by the member states. And don't forget, this is a UN body. The committee monitors the implementation of the national measures of the member state to fulfill their obligations. It watches over the legal obligations to counteract discrimination against women, progress for women made, and reviews the reports submitted by the state parties every 4 years. This procedure of actual dialogue, developed by the committee, has proven valuable because it allows for an exchange of view and a clearer analysis the anti-discrimination policies in various countries. Furthermore, the committee can also launch inquiries into grave and systematic violations of the Convention. Article 21 empowers the committee to make suggestions and general recommendations based on the examination of the reports and the information received from the state parties and from civil society. These, as well as the comments of from the states party, are included in the session reports of the committee. Suggestions are usually directed at the united entities, with general recommendations addressed to state parties, and usually elaborate the committee's view of the obligation assumed under the Convention. Moreover, optical protocols to the Convention, which exists since 2000, empowers the committee to consider individual or group complaints of violation of the Convention. Next slide, please. The state's obligation. By accepting the Convention, states commit to taking measures to eliminate discrimination against women, which includes incorporating gender equality into their legal systems, abolishing discriminatory laws, and adopting anti-criminalization legislation. Secondly, establishing tribunals and institutions to protect women from discrimination. Thirdly, eliminating discriminations by individuals, organizations, or businesses. Countries that ratify the Convention are legally bound to implement its provisions, submit progress reports, and allow the CEDAW Committee to monitor complaints. States must explain their actions during public sessions, after which recommendations are issued, potentially leading to public criticism if obligations are unmet. The Convention allows reservations, provided they are not in conflict with the goals. Some states justify reservations based on national law, tradition, or religion, but this can create conflicts with the Convention. Article 2 and 16 explicitly state that traditions, religion, or political practices, as well as incompatible domestic laws, cannot justify violence. Reservations to Article 16 are considered impermissible and should be reviewed or withdrawn. Next slide, please. The interaction of the civil society. During the session of CEDAW, the expert considered each state report and addressed its concern and recommendations to the member states in a form of binding observations. Civil society includes NGOs are welcome to take part in the sessions and to formulate requests and act as watchdogs. Civil society is invited to write shadow reports, but also to make oral intervention before, and this happens during private sessions with the expert, or during the session in front of the states parties. Civil society findings are crucial for the CEDAW committee and are part of the end of the report of the session. Next slide, please. Linking CEDAW to the Platform for Action and SDGs. All articles of CEDAW are linked with both documents, but I leave this in the hands of my esteemed colleagues. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Berthe. So, getting to know and understanding the working of these instruments. You mentioned the principles of CEDAW being non-substantive, equality, non-discrimination, and state obligation. Where you told us the need, the experts and the reporting, the state obligations, the monitoring regularly on the basis and the process, the interaction of civil society through a shadow report and an oral intervention. I actually see that this is connecting with Sir Optimist in our work all throughout everything that you've been talking about. How many of our nations have signed or ratified this convention that you're talking about? Do our members know their own nation and what obligations that they have connected with, and what has been implemented from that obligation down through laws into their own country? So this is all part of work and wonderful advocacy at a national level that our members can also pick up. The shadow report, who has been part of or instigated one of the shadow reports to their country's reporting? Berthe has showed us where the connections with Beijing plus 30 and the SDGs lay in this last slide. Thank you very much. Do we have Dawn Marie as yet? Dawn Marie?
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Oh, wonderful. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Dawn Marie Lemonds is a long-time Seroptimist as well. And just once again, a couple of little things I've written on the front because I will put the rest in the chat box. Dawn Marie has been the SI of America's president, 2017 to 2018, the SI program director, and that's long before the history we have now, which we have advocacy directors, not program. And that was in 2007 and 2011. I remember you getting quite a lot of things done during your time, Dawn Marie. Welcome. And because Dawn Marie has attended the actual Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995, she'll bring the passion to explain her experience, which is the start of our Beijing Platform for Action. Dawn Marie, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to join. My Zoom link said a different time, so thankfully I have a friend that called me, and I'm so happy to be here. You know, this was the most significant event that I attended in my life, and I'm going to be giving a little personal overview of what happened and who was there and why we were there and what the work was, and just give you a feeling, because my goal is really to urge you who haven't been to any of these events to make it important to do that. It will change your life, I promise you. So, of course, as we heard that wonderful presentation by Berthe, there were two parallel events going on at the same time. One was in Waibaro, which had about 30,000 plus women, a few youth, and a few men at it. And then there was the Beijing Platform for Action, the Beijing Conference, Fourth World Conference, was happening in Beijing. So we were in two different places, which is a little bit of a odd story. We were all supposed to be in Beijing, but the Chinese people got a little afraid that there was going to be too much commotion. So we were moved within literally a few months before the event to a town nearby. And during this time, there was one official delegation who was in Beijing, and there were seven people on that delegation, and several from around the different parts of the world, which was really great. So we had somebody from each federation, at least one person. And why did I go? I mean, I was a regular, ordinary seroptimist, as one of our past international presidents said. Well, I had heard that in 1985, when I was a brand new seroptimist, that seroptimists were at these international conferences, and they had been in Nairobi. And I couldn't imagine what wonder that would be. Now, of course, that was the Fourth World Conference. The first one was held in 1975 in Mexico City. Second one was in Copenhagen. Third one was in Nairobi. And then the fourth world one was in China. So I yearned to go and started saving my money, and was happily chosen to be one of, we know there was well over 100 seroptimists. I want to say that seroptimists were at every single one of those four world conferences. Now, just before that, of course, because this was to be the penultimate, or the ultimate document that was being prepared in Beijing at the government conference, there were prep comms all around the world for about a year. And at each of them, organizations and country delegations and worked to figure out what were the significant issues for women. And I went to one in Oakland the year prior to going to Beijing, and Seroptimists also held one in New York City. So we were giving input from the beginning, and ended up going on a tour to China with a group. It was called the People of Color Tour, with 150 women and youth. All of us that were in Beijing. All of us went there with different marching orders. Of course, our delegation had a very important task to take. But what was our goal? Our goal was to learn and to engage and to share and experience, but most importantly, to bring back. And if you imagine that there were 50,000 people at both of these events, what was brought back was often described as the many sides of an elephant, because that's exactly what it was. Many, many, many experiences. So, as I said, I was a person that went to the NGO forum in Wairau. It started actually a few days before the Beijing conference started. Next slide. But the whole event was launched in at the opening ceremony on the 30th of August. And here I am anticipating going. I arrived actually in China at 3 a.m. We went and got our passes. Can you imagine that? After flying from America, we got our welcome passes, because then we didn't have to wait in a big line, because at 9 that morning is when the actual things started. Next slide. The opening ceremony was just grand, and we felt so lucky because, of course, not everybody could fit in the stadium. But as you can imagine, when you bring China together with all these world organizations, it was just such an incredible experience. Next slide. There were banners and proclamations and government people speaking. But the slide with those two women raising their arms in just exultation, there was such anticipation of what was going to happen. And everybody in the stadium, and I don't remember how many were in the stadium, every one of us ended by singing, "Let's keep on moving forward." And I think that is our marching orders today as well. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about what happened in Wairau. Just to set the context, we all got a little, we of course didn't have a app that had all the programs on it like we do today. We had a booklet, and in the booklet was 2,000 events that were going to happen at the NGO Forum, 2,000. And at the very first day at 9 a.m., there were 200 choices of different activities to go to. And actually, there ended up being more than 2,000 events, because some events didn't even get in the program. But here is our delegation, and our emphasis was on key education is the key to progress. Next slide. We had so many events going on. This is Patsy Daniels and our lovely, who was past president then, and our lovely delegate from Papua New Guinea. And we met in so many odd places. We met in the street, we met in tents, we met in fields, we met because we were in this little town. We had a school building, we had businesses gave up their rooms. It was just so interesting. And I went to, and within the first few days, I went to a workshop with Margaret Lobo, past international president Margaret Lobo. And the speakers didn't show up because they couldn't get a pass they couldn't get a visa. And it was on women in prison. So what does Seroptimus do? We ran the workshop. We just figured we knew how to run a workshop, and we ran the workshop. Every day, as I said, we had so many choices to go to. And my focus at the forum was on human rights issues, for sure. And there were 10 days of workshops. There were, I went one day to a day-long tribunal on violence against women, which was just shattering, but it revealed issues around the world in every region of the world. This was my first exposure to human trafficking, and actually it was the first exposure for many people to human trafficking. Sadly, not so new anymore, is it? And I even one day after that 8-hour tribunal, I went to a gospel singing workshop, which was just great. And it was so crowded because so many people needed to rest their spirit a bit that the presenters gave two workshops instead of one just at that very time. Next slide. There were banners. The Philippine people, of course, our members there are so joyful and so enthusiastic. And I think there was probably 30 of them, but we never got a master list of who all was there. The whole environment was just filled with just energy and excitement. There was never any despair or dispute or anger, but there was noise, of course. There was protests about one issue and the other, and often a protest about pro-abortion was happening on one side and anti-abortion was happening right across the street, the aisle from it. So it was very enthusiastic. Women took on issues that were important to them, and I think that's the important thing. And we did it peacefully. Next slide. We met in groups. This group is the actual group from SIA that we're planning an event. And then, of course, we had meetings and eatings. And this is some of our delegation eating lunch in the quad. It was a time of celebration. So we had a lot of chance to interact together and to share our thoughts. And because it was 10 days long. Now, our event started right after the opening ceremony, and the meeting in Beijing, the official conference, happened a few days later. So the whole event went from August 30th till the 13th of August. Next slide. So what you need to know is what the work was that was happening. And Berthe gave such a lovely overview of the process. And that was essentially the process that was happening in Beijing. In Beijing, there were 17,000 people, 6,000 delegates from the countries, 4,000 people from accredited NGOs, 4,000 media, and then the rest were civil service people from China. They were there following the process that Berthe just defined, to work on and complete and agree to the Platform for Action, Equality, Development, and Peace for the world. There were 12 critical areas that came out in this book, poverty being the very first one, education being the second, health, fourth, and violence against women, the next one. I'm not going through all of them, but those issues still reign, I think, as our most important issues. It's interesting to note that the 12th issue was the girl child. And ironically, that didn't even get put into the resultant document that came out of the PrepComs until the very end, just months, literally months before this final document was being launched before the conference. The document was launched, of course, after the conference. And the issue of trafficking was not even mentioned at all until that last chapter was put in, and it was only mentioned a few times in the Platform for Action. So I'm just going to end. There's too many takeaways to really mention. Obviously, I've already said, I really urge you to grow and to go, and you will grow from the experience of meeting women. I mean, my very first day, I'll never forget, I was walking in this country by myself. I met a woman that had a beautiful, lovely African outfit on, and we started talking, and she said she was from Eritrea. And I said, oh my goodness, I don't know where it is. And she said, well, that's because we've been in civil war for 30 years. And I said, what do you do there? And she said, I'm writing the Constitution. And here I was in a thousands-year-old country from a 200-year-old country, meeting a woman from a brand new country. So that is one of my memories for life. We have made many gains in some of the areas for women, but unfortunately, we've lost so many as well with climate change, civil unrest, COVID, technology, AI. I could mention so many things, but the work continues. and we have more work to do. And I'm so excited about the work of Generation Equality, where young people are stepping up with new ideas and capacities to help change our trajectory in this topic for women and girls, and this issues for women and girls. I'm really eager to hear what will happen at this next conference. Thank you so much.
Dawn Marie, how amazing. I can feel the energy within your voice. And what an amazing experience. Thank you. Equality, development, and peace. I mean, you're right, because the issues then are still the same issues today. And where progress on through education, we haven't changed our strategy either. But as far as moving forward together, I think that is something we have to continue and get better at. But for everyone to start to see the pattern here, you see CEDAW that was presented first is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And it is an international treaty that helps women around the world fight discrimination. Now, this Beijing Platform for Action, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was adopted at a conference where feminists organized and advocated for the ratification of CEDAW. So we've got this other instrument that's come out of the ratification of our first discrimination. And when the first Convention on Discrimination, remember, it came in, it was done through the 70s, and then this one is 1995. So you're talking about 20 years later. And we're at a stage where, well, the SDGs are following on from there. So this is women fighting with these women's international human rights instruments. Thank you, Dawn Marie. Now, for our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Linda Witong Abrahm. And I will put your bio as well, Linda, in the chat box. My printer had problems. Sorry, I couldn't print it out prior. But you'll see some of the amazing awards that this lady has. And Linda is a Soroptimist International Global Advocacy Advisor. In 2024, she was inducted into the Marin County Women's Hall of Fame, which I thought was amazing. I had never heard of that. And the Certificate of Special U.S. Congressional Recognition. Not many people get that. And there will be a lot more awards and achievements that Linda has in her bio as well. Linda's going to speak to us about Beijing plus 30. So now from where Dawn Marie was, we're 30 years later, and we're reviewing this document that Dawn Marie was instrumental in being part of the team that's put it all together. The Beijing Platform for Action, the Declaration, 30-year review, achievements and challenges. So we will get the true story from Linda. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm honored to be a speaker among such accomplished women. I will begin my presentation by explaining what Soroptimist's part was in reviewing Beijing 30 plus. It started in April, the spring of 2024, the CSW in Geneva began the task of gathering feedback regarding what progress had been made and what challenges still existed in fully and effectively implementing the Beijing Platform for Action. We obtained this input from NGOs, civil society, global and local organizations, and 56 countries who are in the UN Economic Commission for Europe. For those, I suspect most of you know that UNECE includes the European Union, non-EU, Western and Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, countries in the Commonwealth, independent states, North America, and Israel. Now, there were a number of Soroptimists that began working on this project in the spring of 2024. In the end of the summer, we formulated, and even before then, we were recruiting volunteers to work in the 12 working groups, each of which were focusing on one of the 12 critical areas of concern in Beijing that Dawn and our other famous pioneers worked so hard to accomplish and create. When we were doing this, we were doing a survey and we were asking them, what's the result? Did we really accomplish everything that we set out to achieve in all of the 12 critical areas? Unfortunately, despite notable achievements in equality for women and girls, many challenges still remained in a fully implementing the Beijing Platform for Action. Next slide. Next slide. Oops. Are we frozen here? There we go. Thank you so much. The global overview of Beijing plus 30, when we were doing our analysis and gathering our input, we already knew a certain amount of information based on global surveys and what the UN had said throughout the decades. Now, the UN had said throughout the decades, we absolutely must implement Beijing plus 30. It is the pillar, if you will, in addition to CEDAW, of accomplishing gender equality and rights in all 12 critical areas. Well, we were looking, what is the global overview so far? Well, let's start with poverty. And I may not have time to get to all the statistics, but I'm going to give you an idea. First of all, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said that gender equality is 300 years away from being accomplished. And this was in March of 2023. So we knew that we weren't necessarily going to be looking through this with rose-colored glasses. Poverty. Well, we found out 137 years to end extreme poverty among women. Education and training of women. Well, we found out there was 119.3 million girls that were remaining out of school. And as education is one of our focuses, this was not sitting well with us. Women in health. 47.8 million more women than men are moderately or severely food insecure. Violence against women and girls. Let's see here. Hold on for a second. Oh, wait, excuse me. To backtrack, in poverty, there were a couple of other things that we learned. In poverty, we learned that by 2050, climate change could push up to 158 million more women and girls into extreme poverty and 16 million more men and boys. We also learned that in 2024, billionaire wealth grew by 2 trillion in 1 year alone. Oxfam's latest report found a rate 3 times faster than the year before. At the same time, the number of people living in poverty had barely changed since 1990. And across the world, 3.3 billion people now lived in countries that spent more in servicing their debt than they did on education or health. With respect to education, we also found that the annual global cost of the education skills deficit surpassed 10 trillion, more than GDP of France and Japan combined. In the sub-Saharan Africa, the cost is 210 billion, exceeding 10% of the GDP in this region. We learned, sadly, that if women and girls were provided with electricity, they could spend more time or less time on their household chores. Electrification also increased women's employment outside the home by 9 to 23% points. We also learned that women only accounted still for only 35% of all science, technology, engineering, and math graduates. If it was left unaddressed, the global gender gap in internet use could cost low and middle income countries an estimated 500 billion over the next 5 years. Women in health. We learned that according to countries with data, there are 47.8 million more moderately or severely food insecure women and men, which I've already mentioned. Conflict and displacement are key risk factors for women's physical and mental health. For example, in the Sudan, 1.2 million pregnant and breastfeeding women are expected to suffer from malnutrition and face complications during delivery. Violence against women and girls, another one of our main emphasis here among all of the rights that we are addressing. 1 in 8 women and girls aged 15 to 49 were subject to sexual and or physical violence by an intimate partner in the previous year. Discriminatory legal frameworks still prevail in some parts of the world. For example, 54% of countries do not have laws that base the legal definition of rape on the lack of freely given consent. 72% of the countries set the minimum age of marriage below 18 years with no legal exceptions for both women and men. And at the current rate, child marriage was estimated to end only in 2092. We also discovered that, sadly, with the latest UNODC human trafficking report, women and girls were not only still a major risk of being trafficked for sex exploitation, among other forms of exploitation, but they accounted for 61% of the total in 2022. And this is with the data that we were able to obtain, which in many times is scarce or sometimes non-existent. In addition, we found, sadly, the parallel number of children among detected victims is growing rapidly and alarmingly, increasing by a third over the space of 3 years. In particular, the number of girls detected had surged, increasing by 38%. In several regions, children now account for the majority of trafficking victims detected. Women in armed conflict. In 2023, about 612 million women and girls lived within 50 kilometers of at least one of 170 armed conflicts, an increase of 41% since 2015. We also learned that the United Nations had confirmed a 50% increase in cases of conflict-related sexual violence since 2022, with women and girls suffering 95% of these crimes. Women in economy, surely there's some rosy news there, and there was, but we still knew that 51% of countries had at least one restriction preventing women from doing the same jobs as men. Globally, women spent still 2.5 times as many hours a day on unpaid and domestic work as men. And that meant they were spending approximately 250 million hours per day on things such as water collection, which is over 3 times more than men and boys. We also learned that they accounted for less than 40% of owners of right bearers for agricultural land in 32 out of 49 countries with data. Reshaping the labor markets. Present, 3.7% of women held jobs that could be replaced by technology compared to 1.4% of men. And this was a disturbing statistic for a number of reasons, but to begin with, from my perspective, because there's so many women that have not been trained in digital literacy or the basic rudimentary English, math, critical understanding to even deal with the digital revolution. So this meant that so many women would be held back because they just weren't getting the education and skills they needed. Women in power and decision-making. In 2023, women held 26.9% seats in parliaments, 35.5% of seats in local governments, and 27.5% of managerial positions. Institutional mechanisms. Now, a lot of people aren't really intimately familiar with institutional mechanisms. It is the engine or pillar, if you will, that upholds all of the programs, all of the policies, all of the accomplishments that we can do in achieving gender equality. Now, data is one of the crucial indicators of how we're progressing and what needs to be done. Well, that was on average only halfway point in planning, producing, and making gender data available throughout the global survey. Yet half of all projects on statistics and data supported by official development assistance, financial, devote less than 0.05% of gender-related dimensions. We also determined that in some cases, although states were trying their best, they were failing to create these mechanisms to push for legislative and program reforms, as well as monitoring their progress, which was viewed to us as essential steps towards increasing a more equitable, inclusive future for women and girls. Human rights of women and girls. Well, I think the UN Secretary said it best. Gender equality is 300 years away, and there is an increasing pushback against women and girls' human rights. Not exactly the news you want to hear in a review, but there it is. Women in the environment. Environmental issues are having an increasingly negative effect on women and girls in all of the 12 critical areas of the Beijing Platform for Action. And if we continue on business as usual, it's only going to get worse, as unfortunately, I think the LA fires have recently demonstrated. The girl child, we've already touched on some examples of how it affected her basic rights, early enforced marriage, increase in trafficking of girls, and being subjected to an increase in poverty and, in many cases, child labor. So we were there looking at what our global overview was. So as to the survey, remember, was for the UNECE region. They agreed there was progress, but not fully implemented. Well, why hadn't it been fully implemented when a strong call for implementation had been made? Well, the polycrisis, next slide, please. The polycrisis, which included COVID, geopolitical tensions, economic instability, social polarization, cyber insecurity, and involuntary migration, had worsened poverty as well as other inequalities and human rights. And this all disproportionately affected all women and girls throughout the world, including this particular region. In recent UN reviews regarding the implementation of the Platform for Action, insufficient budget allocations for gender equality had also been identified, wait for it, as a barrier across all 12 critical areas of concern. So, how can you implement and achieve goals if you don't have the funding to do that? Misogyny and discrimination continue to exist within certain legal, economic, political, and cultural systems, unfortunately. And in some cases, it appeared to be increasing. Authoritarianism was rising in some cases, exposing all women's rights groups to increased pressure and reducing their ability to hold decision makers accountable. This disturbing trend also resulted in shrinking spaces for civil society and weakening advocacy for gender equality. In some cases, the issue of gender apartheid, as it is referred to, where all women and girls were legally barred from public life and denied fundamental rights, also remained a grave concern because it appeared to be, in some cases, increasing, not decreasing. So what did the Soroptimists and other NGOs, local, regional, national organizations, and states believe the key aims should be here? Well, the first off was ending violence against women and girls, strengthening legal protections and support systems. Next slide, please. The other one focus or aim was challenging stereotypes, dismantling harmful norms regarding women and girls, economic empowerment, improving access to education, employment, and financial independence for all women and girls. And that included looking at STEM and determining that even women and girls that had got education in STEM were, in many instances, held back by, we still call the glass ceiling, in terms of their advancement within their own groups, or they were reluctant to remain in whatever job or employment they had because of an atmosphere that was not, shall we say, welcoming to diversity, including women participating in whatever the employment task or advancement could offer. There was also the economic empowerment dealing with financial independence for all women and girls. That was seen to be a very important issue. Political participation, another important issue. It was seen that we needed to increase all women's representation in decision-making roles. Next page here. Political will and commitment. This meant pushing for efforts to break down barriers and empower all women and girls to achieve the 2030 goals of the agenda, as well as Beijing. Health and environment. Again and again, we emphasized we have a right to promote the highest standard of physical and mental health, including the right to a clean, healthy environment for all women and girls. And all of this had been agreed by the states, the UN, by 2024. The most recent was the right to a healthy environment. But sometimes when we were, shall we say, looking at proposed resolutions or agreements, we saw the right to health was adequate. And we're going, no, 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 no. It is the highest standard of physical and mental health. So we made sure that that was one of our focuses or aims in this particular case. Next slide, please. The findings highlighted from our survey from our area also included listing what had we found as far as things that were issues that could maybe also be improved. Financial incentives. There was a strong demand for financial incentives across all categories of all women and girls, as it's an essential productive force in all economies. It is also particularly important in times of economic recession or other crises that programs and measures designed to raise the status of all women and girls should not be relaxed, but rather intensified. We call this the austerity moves. And more than once, we saw over the decades, and in some cases recently, an attempt to say, well, it's an austerity move here. We can't afford to support women and girls gender equality programs and policies because, we have to make a budget cut. And we had to go back and point out the decades of observations that said, you know what, austerity measures are not going to work against women and girls. In fact, it harms them further. What you should be doing is increasing their support, their social protection, any type of social net, so to speak, because it's going to not only help women and girls continue to succeed financially in difficult times, but it's going to help the country and their communities and their families. Hello. So every now and then we would have to dust the citations that would remind the states of what austerity measures can do and not do for women and girls. And in this instance, most recently, the UN member states did agree that austerity measures should be balanced in that way. Lack of progress in legislation. Well, there have been notable legal advancements, as we've already discussed, in protecting women and girls' rights, but the implementation of many laws in our particular area remained inconsistent across countries. The lack of political will and commitment. In some instances, there was a lack of political will to strengthen national mechanisms and gender-responsive approaches all across all ministries and public agencies. Economic barriers. Women continue to face wage gaps, limited access to financial services and business, and as to women and girls, restricted ownership of assets such as land. Violence against women. Despite increased awareness, gender-based violence, including online and in-person, remained a pervasive issue across all regions. Sadly, online violence was on the increase, with a lot more barriers to try and find people that had committed online harassment, exploitation, or violence because of the ability to hide under a cloak of evasive connections and internet, which hopefully we are going to be addressing. Leadership. Women remained underrepresented in leadership positions, from the most influential positions in government to the boardroom, including political, STEM research, environmental, and corporate sectors globally. Impact of the global polycrisis. The global crisis, such as armed conflicts, erosion of social cohesion, geopolitical and economic instability, have exacerbated inequalities, increasing the risk of violence and poverty for all of women and girls. And most recently, the Davos 2025 World Economic Risk Reports have said, conflicts, social cohesion breaking down, geopolitical and economic instability, and the risk of violence increasing and poverty for all have affected everyone, including women and girls. So some of the most recent reports and experts are confirming that as well, unfortunately. Digital divide. The Consultation highlighted the need for digital strategies to ensure equitable access to technology, including new frontiers such as AI, and prevent online discrimination and bias against all women and girls. Next slide, please. Cross-cutting issues emerged from consultation. For example, strong international partnerships, the need to address the dual role of technology as both a tool for empowerment and a source of exploitation for both women and girls was considered a factor. Strong international partnerships also included digital inclusion in its cross-cutting issue. Technology. This included, while technology could enhance economic opportunities, it also posed challenges, such as the spread of hidden biases in AI algorithms and increased cyber violence against women and girls. A big issue, which again, we're hoping to solve. The sooner the better with AI. Intersectionality. This was to address various global and local organizations, as well as businesses and representatives from all 56 UNECE countries, needed to address the multiple layers of discrimination that women face based on their sex, race, age, ethnicity, and other identities. Climate change. We were to integrate gender perspective into climate policies and disaster mitigation or prevention and response plans. And that has been sort of a consistent message that we have carried out for a number of years now. Technological advancements. There was a need to ensure equitable access to digital tools while addressing online violence and the potential bias in AI systems, i.e., do the women and girls have electricity? Do they have Wi-Fi? Do they have new and relevant tools by which to get into the digital revolution and not be left behind, but actually be some of the pioneers and recipients of all of its benefits, starting with application to services, education, and other productive innovations that would be available online. Climate crisis and health. The climate-related disasters such as floods, droughts, pollution, and wildfires were disproportionately affecting all women and girls, particularly in the terms of health and well-being. This had to be addressed too, and it was also considered as a cross-cutting issue. Finally, there is an end here. Recommendations to accelerate progress of gender equality. Next slide, please. All right. The recommendations that were made here was they proposed that in order to accelerate progress on gender equality, we should strengthen legal protections, that is, enforce laws to protect all women and girls from violence and discrimination, invest in education, prioritize funding for all women and girls' lifelong quality education, including digital, financial, and climate literacy, and vocational skills and training. Promote economic opportunities, that is, provide women with greater access to financial resources and entrepreneurial opportunities. Enhance data collection, improve data collection methods to better analyze and monitor gender-specific challenges and trends, and foster inclusive policies, which meant create policies that account for the diverse experiences of all women and girls facing intersecting forms of discrimination. Support women's leadership, increase their participation in leadership roles across political, government, social, technology, environmental, and economic sectors. Address economic violence. Combat economic violence as a form of gender-based violence through stronger legal protections and robust implementation. And finally, improve international cooperation, enhance international cooperation to share best practices, and improve data collection, monitoring, and accountability. I am working with the people that I worked with in Geneva and now working in New York. I am so impressed by the NGO's dedication and participation, and Seroptimist International and all of its regions' hard work in trying to implement effectively and urgently Beijing CEDAW, and as you're going to learn, the 2030 agenda. And it's been my honor to represent all of you and to work with all of the NGOs and member states in trying to accomplish this, because I do believe, despite all of the challenges that we are facing, people, if they're educated, will do the right thing. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Linda. There's nearly everyone, I think, on the call has been asking for a copy of your report. And I'll just, a couple of things I'll just mention there is that this will be shown on the SI, this whole presentation will be shown on the SI website and on YouTube as soon as possible.
Yeah, excuse me, Lee.
Sorry.
I had citations for so many of these particular statistics that I was throwing out, but we couldn't fit all of this in our handout. So what I was going to propose to do was to convert it into a PDF format so that you could see the source of some of my statistics. Well, actually, all of my statistics, if that would be okay. Thank you.
Yes, that would be wonderful, because Berthe actually put the link to the UNECE workshops. So that would be where a lot of the information came. But are all of your stats on those in that link? Linda, do you know?
I had to unmute myself. No. Many of the statistics that I have are from, for example, the UN Secretary General when he gave a speech, and from the UN Woman Gender Snapshot Report, and also now from the 2025 World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. So many of those sites I had in my additional PDF that I sent to you. So all I need to do is add perhaps some of the more recent sites that I found since that came to you. Oh, and the most recent, the UNODC report on human trafficking. That's where I got my percentage of the rise in children and girls. And so I have all those citations, but like I said, there was just no way we could put it in a handout and make it for 7 or 10 minutes. So,
but that's wonderful, and it actually shows what we're heading, what we have to work towards. So one, I think we need to quadruple our organisation with the members that are interested in advocacy to try and make a difference to women and girls and push this acceleration of the implementation of the Beijing 12 critical areas of concern.
If I might, I agree. I would also say that we, the Geneva CSW working group, did a report for the member states, which hopefully Berthe can do a link there. And I also wanted to quickly add that Berthe was one of the 3 people that had the task of coordinating and producing the final reports and results. And she made such a terrific impression, and you should be very grateful for her, as well as all of the other Seroptimists, including you and all of the leadership, for supporting us and giving us the time to work on it. Thank you.
Yes, it was very, very valuable because the UNECE was the one that the UN region that did most of the impact in this Beijing plus 30. There's very little, I know Asia Pacific, a little bit has come out of there, but they didn't spend 12 months like Geneva has done. So congratulations and well done on our behalf. It's really fantastic. I'd now like to introduce Pat Black. And Pat is one of 3 of our SI advocacy advisors, of which Linda is, Pat, and the third one is Bev Baker. So they're very valuable people to us. Pat's is going to talk to us about the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'll put your bio in the chat box, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you to Bert and Dawn Marie and Linda for some amazing presentations. I mean, I just don't think you can get that level of presentation for an organization anywhere else but in Sir Optimist International. It is phenomenal. So I'm really grateful to you for giving me the chance to talk about the SDGs, and it won't be at the sort of level that we've just been listening to, I'm afraid. There are statistics, but they will be on the UN website if people want them. Could I have the first slide, please? I'm going to start with the background to the SDGs, which, if some of you remember, were the Millennium Development Goals. Goes back a long way now, doesn't it? But there were Millennium Development Goals put together for the millennium. They were a set of 8 goals that the United Nations decided to try to achieve by 2015. And that's a long time ago now. The goals were based on the Millennium Development Declaration, which every member state signed in 2000 as part of the Millennium celebrations. Now, that was an incredible achievement in itself, having every single member state sign up to these 8 goals. Just to remind you of what they were: eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality and empower women. So gender equality became one of several goals. Reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and develop a global partnership for development. Now, I'm sure you can recognize quite a lot from those 8 goals. As I say, all member states signed up to them, which was quite amazing. And they were intended to be achieved through a universal framework for development, bringing countries on that had been dropping behind in their development. But the progress in one area, say poverty, was going to be dependent on the progress in another area, such as education. Unfortunately, by the time we got to 2015, some targets had not been met. Though there was significant progress, as I say, some statistics, not as much as Linda's, but 111 million people completed primary school education by 2015. 471 million people were lifted from extreme poverty. Maternal mortality fell by 45%. HIV infections and malaria deaths declined by more than 40%. And more than 25% of the world's population got improved sanitation. And those were all fantastic achievements in their own right. I'm not sure how much Sir Optimists were involved in that, but certainly they contributed to the education one and the one related to gender equality. Coming up to 2015 and the end of those particular development goals, the Millennium Development Goals, the member states through the UN started to look at replacing Millennium Development Goals with much more ambitious targets and with a longer timescale. And they went through a review of what some of those statistics were that I've just quoted to you. And as a result, we got the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. Now, I'm pretty certain that, well, I hope every single one of you know this little graphic with the 17 goals that are due to change the world by 2030. Again, as has been described by Dawn Marie and Linda, SI were involved in the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. There were regional consultations, and SI took part in those and presented a lot of information on a number of the goals. I remember going to a meeting in Glasgow of Throptimists from Scotland, where we were putting together a number of suggestions about what should be included in the future goals and how they should be measured. Because one of the questions that came out of the Millennium Development Goals was, how are we measuring them? And I'll come back to that. So we had an SI delegation at the UN in 2015 for the SDG declaration, along with, as you can see, many thousands of other NGOs. The Sustainable Development Goals are also known as the Global Goals. They were adopted at the General Assembly in 2015, September 2015, as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoyed peace and prosperity. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are integrated. They're meant to overlap with each other. That was one of the lessons learned from the Millennium Development Goals. You have got to work across one to achieve another. They recognize that action in one area will affect outcomes in others, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Now, the member states all again contributed, committed to prioritize progress for those who are furthest behind. Do you remember the slogan that came out of that meeting? Leave no one behind. So somehow this group of 17 goals, we're going to have a set of achievements that would equalize the peoples of the world, including women and girls, but not just women and girls, the whole population. It was agreed that the creativity, know-how, technology, financial resources from all of society was very necessary to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in every context. So they became the agenda for sustainable development, or, if you like, the Agenda 2030. Each SDG, each Sustainable Development Goal, 1 to 17, has a set of measurable targets, which have become the main focus in recent years, because we have got to achieve those targets by 2030. And at the moment, each year, the Secretary General at the United Nations publishes a report which demonstrates quite clearly we are a long way short of achieving those targets. Could I have the next slide, please? So what are the targets for the 17 SDGs? Well, I have no intention of giving you every target for every SDG. I will give you the two that I think Soroptimists have dearest to their hearts. Our whole raison d'etre, Goal 5, gender equality. And within that, we have very specific targets, which are again broken down. Each is very, very detailed, and you can get it off the UN website, the SDG website. So Goal 5 is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And I hope you know that there are 7 targets within that goal, including increase gender equality laws, including recognizing things like land ownership. There are a lot of women who do a lot of agricultural work, but their work is not recognized. If their husband dies, they lose the land, for example, or they lose their homes. So there's a lot of work to be done on improving those laws. Reduce child marriage and female genital mutilation. We as Soroptimists have done a lot of work on this. If you remember, we had the President's International Appeal a couple of years ago. Sharon Fisher had several projects which tried to expand the reduction of child marriage and female genital mutilation, especially in Africa. Had some very great success, but there's still an awful lot to be done. Reducing the number of women in unpaid care work. This is a very high priority, and I'm pleased to say that as a member of the W7 advising the G7 group, I was able to contribute quite a major part of the text to go to the G7, which has resulted in a number of countries, not all countries, but a number of the G7 countries picking this up as a major priority. And I'm pleased to say that UK is one of those. So I think we are playing our part. Across Europe, a number of European countries have got involved with a campaign by the European Women's Lobby, which also is promoting the recognition of unpaid care. So we're making some progress, but there's a long way to go. Increasing the number of women in political leadership. I think Linda touched on this. We've still got, thanks to a lot of the statistics, we've still got many steps to take to improve the number of women in any kind of political leadership, whether it's at local level or at international level. So there's a lot more work that we can do on that. And Linda also touched on increasing women's access to technology. Again, an enormous amount of work to be done there. And underneath all of that, there is this huge need to improve gender data collection, particularly on a national level, but also on a local level. And one of the barriers that I'll come on to later is the lack of gender data. And I'll come on to that a bit further on. Can I have the next slide, please? And the second topic that I've chosen is quality education. Goal 4 which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And this has 5 targets. But one of the things that I'd like to point out, and it's a grammatical thing, I'm very keen on text, as many of you will know. And one of the things, there is a strong word in Goal 4, which says quality education. In a lot of countries, we've seen an increase in the number of children in primary education, in secondary education, in more in training. But is it quality? Are the teachers themselves trained? And that's one of the targets in this goal, improving the standard of training for teachers. There's a lot of money being put into increasing the number of schools for children, but has there been an equivalent amount of finance put in for improving the standard of training for teachers and therefore improving the quality of education for teachers and children? Close the gaps for disparities in education. That is much more difficult because there is a huge difference between urban centres and rural centres. There are obviously huge differences in provision for people who are migrants, who are displaced by conflict or by climate change, disasters or whatever. So it's a very difficult one for countries to deal with. And I think that's probably the one where we have least amount of data. And improve sanitation and other infrastructure for all schools. Again, an area which Soroptimists have worked extremely hard on to improve and to get toilets into schools, to get access to menstrual equipment, sanitation pads, etc. They've done a lot of work through projects. We have to do more. There is so much more we can do there, because you can see there how the interrelationship between Goal 4 and Goal 5 exists just on a very small scale. And that's not even touching on the other 15 Sustainable Development Goals, which all have an impact either on gender equality or on the quality of education. So I've only touched on that very lightly, but it's an area that we're going to need to put some improved and increased activity into over the next 5 years if the targets are going to be achieved. So how do the SDGs and SI work relate? Can I have the next slide, please? All the federations, through their members, focus on particular SDGs. SIA, for example, focuses very, very clearly on SDG 4 and education. Absolutely fantastic, because they do an enormous amount of work on that. And different federations focus on different things. SI Africa have picked up cervical cancer and are focusing on health of women. So they're looking at SDG 3. So each federation may overall be looking at trying to help to achieve a particular sustainable development goal. But they may also be encouraging clubs to look at them on an individual or local basis, perhaps working with friendship links in different countries. And the United Nations has put the SDGs into 4 categories: planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. And you can probably work out which of those go where. But for planet, protect the planet from degradation, including through sustainable consumption and production, sustainably managing natural resources, taking urgent action on climate change. So they relate to the SDGs on manufacture as well as under the oceans, and look at things in a much more integrated way. Prosperity, ensure that all human beings can enjoy prosperous and fulfilling lives, and that economic, social, and technological progress occurs in harmony with nature. Now, that relates back to the planet, doesn't it? So it's about linking those. Can we see the linkages between each of those? Peace. Foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. And that would include our campaigns against violence on women and girls. But also, it would include the work that we do to encourage education and help young people to understand how you can live together in prosperity and supporting the planet. And the same applies in partnership. We work together with as many partners as we can. I think, as Lee said at the beginning, we have a representative here from every Women Treaty. And that is one of the ways in which we can help to implement sustainable development through partnerships. So we have to look at them very carefully and look at our advocacy across a number of the SDGs. And that's the way that the UN reps work. Doesn't matter which UN center that they are actually attending, they will be looking across all the SDGs. They will also be looking at Beijing Platform for Action and CEDAW, of course. So we've got this interconnection, interrelationship. But no SDGs have been achieved so far. Where are we at? 2025, 5 years left to go. That's not a huge amount, is it? Some areas, we think they've gone backwards. Lack of data, as I've said, from many states is a major challenge. Next slide, please. You've already heard about how these linkages work. How do SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and CEDAW and Beijing Platform for Action all work together? Well, from my point of view, I don't think they have worked together very well over the last 30 years. I think that we have taken them as very separate and individual pieces of United Nations activity. But if we look at them carefully, we can see they have to be a part of each other if we are to achieve gender equality. I can't remember, was it at Beijing that Hillary Clinton coined that phrase?
Yes.
Women's rights are human rights.
Yes.
And that has been a fundamental to all the work that we have done on gender equality ever since whether it's Seroptimus or any other women's organization, because CEDAW provides us, as Berthe says, with the platform, a clear tool to indicate that human rights are women's rights, and that we need to make sure that nation states, member states, are reminded of that all the time. CEDAW does regularly monitor. Berthe has explained that each country is required by the CEDAW Commission to look at what they're doing and provide a report. For the Beijing Platform for Action, it is actually written in to UN Women's Constitution that they have to report on progress every 5 years through CSW. A lot of people don't realize that. When UN Women was formed, and I think that was just over 10 years ago, that was written into the requirements for CSW. And every year at CSW, we look at the work of the action plan from Beijing and see how it relates to the work being done at CSW. And when we're looking at agreed conclusions and the text, then we try to refer back to the agreements that were made through the course of the Beijing Platform for Action. Hasn't worked all the time, and it's still not as strong as we would like it. But I hope from everything that Linda has described, you will recognize that we're trying very strongly that this year, 30 years on, we're trying to make a very, very strong platform to connect Beijing Platform for Action and renew the actions, update the actions, and bring them through to connect with the Commission on the Status of Women every year. It's no good reporting every 5 years and having a very weak report. It is important that we connect CEDAW, we connect CSW, we connect Beijing Platform for Action. And I am sure that somewhere along the way, we will connect that into the gender equality, SDG 5. SDGs, we have to report on a voluntary basis to the high-level political forum. But again, that is very weak because it's not a requirement is not made for every country or every year. There are specific SDGs each year identified by the UN General Assembly to report on, but it's only on a voluntary basis. And we need to hold our nations to account, because I think for these reasons, we have seen a particular lack of progress on gender equality and the achievement of many of these rightful targets that have been placed in the United Nations framework. So could I have the final slide, please? So Agenda 2030. We've got 5 years to go, as I said, and there's the Secretary General's report for 2024 shows that no Sustainable Development Goal target has yet been met. And there's only 5 years yet to go. So some progress has been made for SDGs. I have to say the education does show some progress. And in some countries, the SDG 5 on gender equality shows some progress. Generation equality has been set up and is being run by UN Women to get further commitment, particularly through young people, on gender equality. And let's hope that that makes some progress, but that's been very weak until now. Although 1 or 2 member states have actually committed to it. They have equality action groups and have been trying, for example, to eliminate violence against women and girls. But it's still uphill work. The data collection continues to be erratic. And I'm sure Linda has found this in working on the surveys that they do. It's not always easy. Some countries are very good. Some countries will continue to provide gender equality data, which is extremely useful and very clear, but others will not provide anything. And that includes on areas like health, as well as education. Is there anything we can do? Well, Dawn Marie was urging you to go to some of these international events like CSW. And she's right. It will change your life. It will help you to understand Soroptimist International and your advocacy work in a very, very different way. I have to say, going to CSW for the first time 25 years, 30 years ago for me, completely changed my outlook on life. And I think Dawn was saying that going to Beijing changed her life as well, learning about trafficking for the first time. It's amazing the women that you meet just walking down the street, isn't it, Dawn Marie? I went to CSW, it wasn't the first time, but at CSW, one meeting, I listened to a young woman who had survived the genocide in Rwanda. And she wanted the microphone to thank the Soroptimists in Rwanda for the work that they had done in helping her survive that genocide. You can't get that experience anywhere else other than being there yourself. Do attend. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it's helped.
Thank you very, very much, Pat. You've mentioned a number of things there. And as this particular presentation, we've put together the presentations in chronological order. So we have from 1975, we have CEDAW. We're creating and starting to create the Women's Human Rights Instruments. We went to 1995, where Dawn Marie's explained how the event that she attended, and out of that came the Beijing Platform for Action and the Declaration. So this now, you're talking about the SDGs, or the MDGs to start with. So out of the MDGs, so in the year 2000, we're talking about 25 years later, is one of the first times that gender equality has come into the subject of women's human rights. So officially it was in the MDGs. And now we've gone another 15 years on to the SDGs, which is 40 years later, and we are now just starting to learn to measure what's being done. And we're not meeting those measurements. So we really do have a lot of work to do as Soroptimist. And I thank you very much for putting that together. Data collection you mentioned, which is something that's come out in each of the presentations. And even if anyone follows the UN Women Snapshot report, it comes out about September every year. That's the thing that they mention, is the lack of data collection able to go into those reports. So they're gathering, and some people are getting a little bit better, but it's still not there. We don't really know what's happening around the world with gender equality. Gender equality and advocacy are two things that are missing from all of these presentations. So we need to work, Seroptimist, go through and start working aggressively and assertively, involve everyone you can to make a greater impact. We will have maybe 5 minutes of questions. Bev, are you there? Are there any questions
I'm ready.
Thank you. And Bev is another one of our SI Global advisors, advocacy advisors. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a wonderful presentation. And the first three questions have to do with CEDAW, and they are for Beth. What happens beyond reporting, and what can be done if a country or organization is not following CEDAW?
Thank you, Beth. I have to say what can be done if they don't follow. Yeah, they can have been criticism. They can be negative publicity, but there aren't any specific, let's say, measurements that will punish, if you can use that term, a state, because the states are all there on a liberally basic. And they have voluntary basic, if you like, and there is nothing. That's the problem with all the UN treaties. There is nothing to really take action if a country doesn't follow up. You can, of course, be asked to come for the General Assembly and to have questions you need to answer, but that's it. It stays with that, unfortunately. Thank you.
Okay, the next question has to do with what Seroptimist can do in assisting in creating a shadow report. What information would be useful, and how could a club members take part?
When I write the reports, the shadow reports to CEDAW, I mostly will go to the unions or to the countries and ask information about certain questions that the experts have. I have to say, until now, not many unions are reacting when I send out a message. So I would encourage, if you are really interested, I think, please, when you get a question from one of the UN representatives, whether it's CEDAW or some other conventions, and they ask you to give some answers to certain questions that the experts are asking, please give them the information. Then we can write a report. The report is always written on the questions who are coming from the expert or who are based on their reporting. This is not something vague. We cannot report on all questions because we only can write a report on 3,000 words. So we have to see that we take the questions of the experts who are linked with the work Seroptimist is doing in that country, or the issues who are very important, not for one town, but for the country. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the last question about CEDAW is member states and representatives, often from women's groups, to comment or reflect on the state report. Has a Seroptimist ever reflected or been in such a role?
You have to be very careful. At the General Assembly, if you when the report is spoken, the NGO is only in the public space. We are an observer, we cannot speak. When the report is from CEDAW are up for questioning. So if some of the reps are there, they can be in the public and they can observe it, but we cannot speak. And everybody can ask to be there if they are in New York. You only have to be from an NGO or who has an ECOSOC status, and that's for us no problem. Thank you very much. And you have to excuse me, but I have another meeting. I have to open my link to the other meeting. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you,
Berthe. Whatever question you have, please reach out.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Another question for anybody who wants to answer is, how can we involve men and boys in the fight for gender equality and to fight against gender-based violence?
That's one of President Soo-young's focus, actually, for this biennium. But it's also something that we've done across Seroptimist in a number of areas. Pat or Linda or Dawn Marie, do any of you wish to?
If I can just say that there is a global organization, the White Ribbon Alliance, which has representatives in many countries and encourages men to sign up to take a pledge to challenge any time they see violence against women or girls. They do a lot of training. For example, I'm pretty certain they do training in Australia with the Australian Army, for example. So it's worth reaching out if you're interested in perhaps engaging men in the advocacy work that we do, to look at whether it's possible to partner with them. I'm pretty certain the Republic of Ireland were partnering with them at one stage. They're in many, many countries across the world. Check them out on Google. White Ribbon Alliance.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Next question is a general question. What, if anything, is Seroptimist International doing for the women in Afghanistan?
That's a tough one. I guess there's things that I'm aware of that is being done through other organizations within the country, but you have to have the contact. And I know every woman treaty that is on this line, and we're connecting with them, and some of the women are from Afghanistan. One of the invitations we had just recently, and it came through, I think, from Lindsay Green from the SIGB sent it through to me. Lindsay, you'll be pleased to know that I sent that on to Patricia Elias from Every Woman Treaty, because they work in all of those countries, and also to Najla, which is a past judge that was evacuated from Afghanistan, but she's now living in California. So I sent them the information. They were calling for sponsorship of 5 people from Lebanon, Syria, Afghanistan, and Iran, and there was one other, 5 different countries. And they wanted applications from those countries for activists, to young activists 18 to 30, to go to CSW 69. And I know 3 of them at least have put in applications to go from Afghanistan, Syria, and I think Lebanon was the other country. So we have to work through people that have got connections, and it's about the only way we can do it.
Thank you. And then I believe the last question was about Linda's information. When and where will that be posted?
Linda has, I don't know if Linda's still on, but
No,
she
I'm
mentioned
here.
that
I'm here.
Oh, you might be able to say it yourself, Linda.
Yeah, I have to. I wish I didn't have to, but I have to go to the dentist this morning, and I'm not sure how I'm going to be after I have that visit. And then I have to go and do some work on an unsolved homicide tomorrow. But I intend to have a paper that has all the statistics, including the new ones, no later than Friday. For Lee. There's some I already have the statistics and references to, but what I always try to do when I'm submitting a paper is have a citation for each statistic I have. So that's what I plan on doing.
And that was going to be in PDF. Linda was going to put that in a PDF. So Linda's Friday to me will probably be my Saturday. So I'd say by the weekend, and then I'll see if we can get the email list from this work with headquarters to see how we can get that out there.
Lee, if I might, I'm somewhat handicapped when it comes to doing PowerPoint presentations, especially with citations. My thought was I would do a PDF for you, and then you could break it down however you want. And in my PDF, I would be only concentrating on the section where I listed statistics.
Okay. Thank you.
Although I know
Linda.
I can actually, no, I can send you, I take that back. I can send you what I did in every single one of them and how I orchestrated it. And then you can make it all pretty and fluffy and do what you magic.
Okay.
you all can
I
do.
might not need to, but I'll put it together. If I need your help, I'll come back to you.
Oh, that's like leading the blind,
Okay.
me leading the blind lead. Then we have to go to someone who, maybe Dawn's smiling really big over there. Maybe we can
We'll
go to
find a
somebody who
way.
has artistic taste and stuff.
We will find a way and see how we
Okay.
can get it out. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Linda. And
Thank
one
you.
hand's been up. We have to finish the session. I'm sorry, but Klaatje?
Thanks, everyone. This was really brilliant. Just one comment adding on to the answer to my question from Berthe. There are some countries who do have a woman's rep speaking in the General Assembly, but there's very few. I know the Netherlands have one, so that's always in September in the General Assembly, but there's not that many others. So that's just one add-on. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank
and
you.
I'll help, Linda, if you want me.
Thank you. So just wanted to cap this evening off, or it's evening, it's early morning for me. Yes, CEDAW, Beijing Plus 30 and the Sustainable Development Goals are all instruments related to women's human rights. That's the connection all the way through, and the chronological development from one to the other as it started in 1975. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is CEDAW, is an international treaty that helps women around the world fight discrimination. Now, you heard from Berthe that the Convention is the only human rights treaty which affirms the reproductive rights of women and targets culture and tradition as influential forces shaping gender roles and family relations. The Beijing Plus 30, now those of you that are going to CSW, you will hear about the gaps and the challenges and the progress, and you've heard a lot of it tonight that hopefully will take you into sessions to be able to mention and talk on the subjects that you've heard this evening. The 30th Beijing Plus 30, which is the review year that Pat mentioned, so they're reviewing 30 years later the Beijing Platform for Action. The 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was a time to assess progress and mobilize action to address gender equality and the SDGs. The SDGs. The Sustainable Development Goals are a set of goals that include targets for gender equality. We haven't had targets in any other document before. So it's a start, but you can see how the development has happened over the chronological time. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was adopted at a conference where feminists organized and advocated for the ratification of CEDAW. And the CEDAW committee is a group, as we heard, of independent experts that monitor the implementation of CEDAW. The SDGs include targets for gender equality, and the Beijing Plus 30 anniversary is a time to assess progress and mobilize action to address them. And if there is one message that echoes forth from the Beijing conference in 1995, and Pat mentioned this as well, it reflects on our work as Seroptimists. Hillary Clinton said that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. So all of this discrimination, violence, trafficking, everything that's happening, they are women's human rights. And we take every issue, you look at it from a human rights perspective. So I'd like to think that you've enjoyed this evening, you've got something out of it, and we'll see what we can do about getting the presentation up as quickly as possible. And I'll get that PDF out. We'll find a way to get a PDF out to you. Thank you.